Looks good. Great. Yeah, I'm the founder and director of Vital Brain Health. So we're basically a neurofeedback brain mapping facility and center in Pasadena, California. And we have clients all over the country and now all over the world, which is exciting.
Wow.
Yeah, and we serve a unique group of people. It seems like a third of our practice supports kids, neurodivergent kids, neurodivergent children between the age of like 7 and, I guess it goes up to 18 plus.
Yeah.
And children and adults with anxiety and trauma. And so we have kind of a very complementary role with what you do.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think it's so not just fascinating, but important to take our brains seriously. And especially in my field where we talk a lot about, the mind of the things that the brain does, but rarely do we take a look at what the hardware actually is. And the way that I've tried to explain it to some of my clinicians is going, if you're a race car driver, you really want to know what's going on underneath the hood. And it's important to have an understanding if you're going to do whatever it is, a session with somebody, and you're going to be sitting down with them, doing things like empathizing, hearing them, that we understand what the actual things are that we're saying that we're doing, not just from a good feely kind of place, but from a place of like, no, there's something actually changing in the brain. And I wonder if there's a shift that you see happen with your clients when they come to understand their brain as an important piece of hardware that they have to take care of, or that may have been impacted in their life that maybe they didn't quite fully understand.
Yeah, fully. There's two levels that I see from my perspective. The first is, that self-awareness becomes much more complete, right? Because, and then the second is the ability to then change it is also really important, right? So with the self-awareness, yes, we use a different metaphor, but it's also helpful, right? And so I love, being able to find different metaphors that fit. We use the hardware software kind of idea, like our laptop, right? Like we say that, our therapist colleagues like yourself really get to help the individual with their quote unquote software, right? And but again, we don't really look at the hardware, and what we don't realize is that there are biomarkers in the brain. There are ways that the brain fires. There are ways that the brain is basically patterning itself that can largely influence like what we think is our personality, our choice, our agency. And so both for the therapist and for the individual to see, well, we've been working on why I worry so much over the last, let's just say, 5 years.
Right.
And now, we go to Vital, we do this brain mapping, and now we see that, there's this part of my brain that tends to overfire. And so we can talk about this from a software perspective for a long time. And really until that part of the brain can be trained to kind of like fire less, I'm going to keep ruminating and worrying. And so like, the agency kind of gets reduced if I don't understand that there's a missing piece, right?
Right. That can be helpful. And then even to just see it, to see it physically.
Yes.
I saw, you guys have, and I remember going by your clinic a while ago and being able to see what you meant when you talk about something like a brain map, or even, I forget what the process is where you wear the headgear,
the neurofeedback.
The neurofeedback is that what it is? Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So, being able to show people like a map of what their brain is doing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I'd love to. Yeah. So there are different ways to image the brain, right? And so I say there's structural imaging and functional imaging, and that's without getting too complicated. The same idea with the laptop. An MRI, a CT scan, all those brain imaging tools that we're used to, that would be looking at the structure of the brain.
It's a static image,
right? So that's like looking at my laptop and saying, are there any dents on my laptop, right? Are there any missing keys on the keyboard, right? So, but like my laptop can still not work as well as I'd like, or I may not understand it as well, even though, there's no dent
Yeah.
right? There's no missing key. So there's another group of imaging tools that are now emerging. And so without getting too technical, like the Amen centers are becoming more well known because of Dr. Amen. And so they look at blood flow and they're looking at it functionally. So they're seeing like which regions of the brain are getting maybe, more or less blood flow, which kind of gives us an idea of how much they're working. And so what we're doing is also based on, excuse me, on EEGs. And so a person wears a swimmer's cap.
Yeah.
They get to basically sit there with 10 minutes with eyes open, 10 minutes with eyes closed. And we're basically taking a movie of their brain. And then
just at resting without them doing anything.
Yeah. Because what we want to see is, again, kind of that metaphor of the laptop. We want to see their operating system, right? Because we can tell a lot about the brain when it's just sitting there. And then now we can use many forms, and we use in our office machine learning. We also use a lot of 3D analysis. And so now we can like get a 3D image of these different regions of the brain, how they're firing to, again, maybe a little bit too much, maybe a little bit too little, maybe they're connecting too much, maybe not enough. And so, but yes, then the client has, we get to sit down and look at their brain in 3D.
Yeah.
And we get to highlight maybe some of the key regions that are probably influencing what they're dealing with.
Yeah, that's so incredible. And so how granular is that able to get? I saw in there that you're looking at, first of all, brain waves, right? But then also different areas of the brain tooth in the 3D map.
Yeah.
For you as a clinician looking at that, how granular of information are you able to get? I'm picturing like a satellite image where, if you're wanting to pick up houses and buildings that might be helpful. And then at some point, you know what I mean? The resolution isn't there. I don't know how you would relate that of how much information.
Yeah. To qualify this too, gosh, maybe later in this conversation, we can kind of talk about like brain mapping 3.0, which I'm saying is what we're doing. And then neurofeedback 3.0, right? And so, how granular? We get to get quite granular, meaning we get to see from the squiggly lines, right, from the actual EEG, tendencies that are going to influence already what's happening in the brain that you actually wouldn't see in the actual 3D images.
Wow.
And so these are called sharp and slow waves. And so this is like, this is a child who I'll give an example really quick, and then I'll kind of go up layers.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
Because that's actually what I'm calling 3.0 is, the need for whoever's doing the mapping to actually understand that there's many layers, and you're going to get insight at each layer. And then you want to put all that together.
Right.
And so, so at a granular level, just from, we can see where regions of the brain are basically, the neurons are just firing when like randomly, when maybe they shouldn't. And depending on which region of the brain it's in, it's going to disrupt whatever that area is supposed to do. So I'll give an example, like in the forehead, right? That's like the prefrontal cortex. We talk a lot about, how that has a lot to do with impulse control and emotional regulation. And so I'm going to use the example of a child. If a child has sharp and slow waves, meaning this kind of random firing that kind of gets the area really excited in that region, it will be extremely correlated with why that child probably has outbursts and meltdowns that last not just like a minute, but they last like 30 minutes. They last an hour. Yeah. Right. Mom and dad are at the grocery store, and like little Johnny is just, not just losing it, but just, it's almost like they're a different person. Yeah. Right. And so, so that's at one layer, is that you wouldn't catch that at any other layer. Right. Right. So like, we need to look at that. But then, yes, we can look at specific regions of the brain. We ourselves look at networks. So we're looking at like more complicated interactions between areas of the brain. And then we get pretty granular because we can use some machine learning, where we can actually see like where are some of the deeper areas of the brain that are kind of sending the signals, so that even though we're hearing it up over here on the back right, it's actually coming from somewhere deeper down inside. Wow. Right. So we can see a lot. Right.
Yeah, which is important. Obviously the brain is so ever changing and complex. To have something where you go, okay, we're reading the signal, but it's actually coming from somewhere else, But even as you say that, I imagine how validating that is. Even a huge even if it's just an exercise, not that it is, but even if it's just an exercise in validation for someone to go, my kid's having a tantrum, and you can go, oh yeah, well, they are having a tantrum. Like,
Yes.
this is what it's like. And for people to see that there's a physical equivalent of what they're experiencing behaviorally from their child or from themselves, huge deal.
Huge.
For them to go, oh, this is an actual thing that this person is struggling with.
Right.
That sounds really humanizing, of being like, oh, it's not just your kid is being difficult. They're doing something in their mind that they're either struggling with or trying really hard at. I just think there's so much that happens, I imagine, even there with just seeing a map of either your own kid's brain or your own brain.
Oh, right. Absolutely. Yeah. Especially too, because I'm sure you see this from a therapist standpoint. Like, the parent starts wondering, well, what's wrong with them? Right. Mm-hmm. What's going on with my parenting style? Right. Why, as to, I'm sure they're getting advice from the father and mother-in-laws, right? I'm sure that there's random, customers at the grocery store giving them parenting advice, right? And and so, there's this, I'm sure, because we hear this all the time with parents, it's like, I just don't know what I'm doing wrong.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
So from a parent's perspective, right, that's very frustrating, very invalidating. And again, it's because they think that there's something that they're lacking, right?
Yeah.
From a child's perspective too, we hear this a lot, which is their self-esteem, their self-identity now is being shaped by this.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm a bad kid, right? I'm unlovable. They really start to then internalize this. And so, at 5, they haven't developed that as strongly, but once they're at, 7, 8, 9, and they're starting to now, begin to form their self-identity, why are they, because they can't control that they're having the outbursts at school. Yeah. So they're the problem kid, right? They can't control that, why no one else wants to, why parents don't want to have their kids play with them, right? So, I'm using an extreme example, but that's kind of like, because it's so obvious that, you can see how everyone was assuming that this child had agency over their behavior. And what we're seeing is that, especially in this case, right, where there's these sharp and slows in this region, like they don't have it. Like it kind of hijacks a little bit, right? Yeah. So for the child too, it's like, what's wrong with me? Am I broken? Am I bad? There's a shame that develops over that. Sometimes they have regions where they're not as self-aware of, or they're not as aware of like how others are being affected by it. Yeah. So then that is its own challenge. But then we can actually see regions of the brain where they are very self-aware and they are more socially connected. And so we'll see how that kind of also shows itself out, where they feel horrible about it, right? They keep doing it. They don't know why they're doing it, right? Yeah. And so, it's
that's incredible. I think a lot when I think about brain structure too. I think about this interplay between state and trait of, Hebb's axiom of neurons are wired together, of the brain itself is so social. I studied Daniel Siegel a lot, and he talks about the social synapse of these structures in the brain that are made to connect with one another and form one another, that the child kind of borrows capacities from the adult brain in order to facilitate the growth and development of their own capacity, like self-regulation or getting through a tantrum.
Right.
Things like this. I wonder how you understand that when you look at a brain of going, on the one hand, wanting to take the shame off of a parent, going, it's not your fault. Look, the kid is doing something wrong. And at the same time, understanding, I'm sure, of like that our brains are intimately formed by one another. That's a complicated picture to try to express, I'm sure, to a parent. But I kind of just, even before we think about talking to parents directly about that, about how you have come to understand that, looking at brains, studying the brain, about what you understand in terms of how the brain develops into those situations.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if I understand correctly, I'll kind of answer it in this way. I think, let me take a step back, right? Yeah. Everything that we do at Vital Brain Health is based on what's been already published and replicated in neuroscience journals. Typically, they're in neuroscience journals. And so we're not trying to diagnose or treat per se, right? Or not per se. We're not trying to diagnose or treat. So what we are trying to understand is to understand tendencies that have been published. These are, there's discussion right now about what qualifies as a biomarker, right? What qualifies as something that you can kind of tangibly say, when we see this, it usually means this, right? So with having said that, there are biomarkers in the brain on the right side usually that are associated with less likelihood for what are called the mirror neurons in the brain to be online, right? And what that means is that we're going to see tendencies that we can kind of then ask the parent and ask the individual, where if we see some of these biomarkers where maybe the mirror neuron systems are not as online, and again, these have been published and replicated, then it's possible that whole attachment, the connection, the self-regulation, or the personal regulation, actually is not as online for that individual.
The social synapse isn't strong for that kid.
Is not going to be strong.
Yeah.
Right. And so not like a light switch, like binary, like off and on, but maybe more like a volume knob. Like it's probably, I'm sure that they have some ability, but it's probably, way less than if like these were really online.
Yeah.
Right. So yes, even that, right. Even that becomes part of the process. It becomes part of the picture. Right. And so then again, the parent's like, look, I wore the child for, 20 hours a day when they were a baby. I've been, trying to regulate myself, right? I've been reading all of Dan Siegel's. I did everything right.
Yeah.
Right. And, the child never felt connected to me, right? They don't have that. They're having these outbursts, right? And so again, having a brain map, gives, again, the parent just a little bit more insight as to what the child is working with.
Yeah.
And then again, they begin to now like re-narrate, right?
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Even I keep coming back to empathy here, of seeing it as kind of an exercise in empathy to take off maybe the self-shaming spiral that a parent might go in, that they need some kind of backboard or feedback, neurofeedback. They need some kind of feedback there of, let's actually look what's going on. Let's explore, see, test, see what's going on. And I think there can be two ways that goes, right? One is a labeling, othering kind of way that you, and I see parents do this on their own, where they go, they're just X, Y, and Z, right? They're just ADHD, right? Or they're just difficult even, or something like that. And that's a way that we can label an other, but there's another way to label where you go, let's actually look at what this child or you as a parent is holding and what's going on functionally in your brain, know? I'm curious too of it, as you think about, let's just take ADHD itself, and go, what are some good ways of understanding the differences actually structurally in the brain that are common for people who struggle with attention? How do you think about that from a neurological perspective? And that's the reason I'm asking, is because I feel like whenever I hear people talk about ADHD, even though it's something that people will talk about as like, no, it's an actual brain difference, I don't very much hear people actually describe, okay, well, what is the difference? What are the common things that we're actually pointing to when we say somebody's struggling with attention, or another word that I like to use there is goal attainment. But yeah, tell me a bit about that.
I have a lot of trouble with that term. Right?
Oh yeah,
with ADHD. And
okay.
Just, for parents to understand, and I'm not criticizing the system, but just for parents to understand that, the diagnosis of ADHD from our colleagues that will then, do the diagnostics, it's essentially the most popular version is, a questionnaire with, I think, about 16 questions.
Yeah.
Right. And that if you check off, and they're all observational, so they're asking the parent, does your child do this? Do they do that? Right. And so,
does your kid struggle with focus? Yes.
Yeah.
They have ADHD.
Right. Exactly. And so, if they check enough of those boxes, bingo, right? They now have that diagnosis and that label. And so, how scientific is it? What's the underlying mechanism that you're kind of asking? Like, what's the underlying principles that are going on in here? What are the underlying processes? Nobody's really talking about, right? So it's possible that term is the widest net possible to throw a lot of people into that, right?
A lot of people into this common bucket of behaviors or difficulties,
Right.
let's say. This is to elaborate that from my own perspective of anytime somebody's having any kind of issue, whether it's a life transition or depression or anxiety, sleep issue, their attention is going to be disrupted.
Absolutely.
Every single time. It's
Absolutely.
one of the first things, just like sleep. It's one of the first things that's disrupted.
Yeah.
Imagine somebody going through a life transition and trying to sit down and, complete, write a poem or something like that. They're not going to be able to do it.
They're not going to be able to do it, right? And so, and in fact, there, there's a lot of research, but there were a few studies that came out literally last year, 2024, where they showed where the blood flow gets diverted from that, forehead prefrontal cortex, which is our, goal attainment, organization, so on, motivational centers. It diverts away from there to those like deeper layers at the second floor. I'm going to use for the triune brain theory, the second floor, which are some of the amygdala regions and some of the other deeper regions. And so when somebody is under high levels of stress or trauma, right, and if it's stress, right, that's going to be kind of a short-term thing. Trauma, it now kind of changed the trait, as you were referring to the state and trait differences. And so now what happens is that person continues to have diverted blood flow away from those prefrontal areas, and what happens is then all the amygdala regions and all these other survival regions begin to wire together longer and longer over time. And
so that first of all, it's temporary state, let's say, of trauma. If it's kept in that inflamed state, now you're starting to see structural changes because of the blood flow and electronic, whatever, lack of, let's say, energy flow there. Yeah. There's now like a deficiency or difficulty with those neuronal connections or myelination of or efficiency of those neurons becomes a lot more sludgy, or something. And so you see something structurally starting to emerge. Yeah. And you're saying kind of more in the limbic regions is much more active, and the prefrontal region tends to be shut down as a response to anxiety, trauma. As a response
to, that higher stress, external stress or trauma. So what that means, what does that mean for like the ADHD conversation? Well, then it's possible that, this ADHD bucket has a lot of sub buckets, right? Which means has a lot of subcategories that they're not subcategories of the thing. They're basically, it's saying that, no, there's all these individual problems that are all presenting with these shared behaviors, and we're calling these shared behaviors ADHD, right? So we're saying the same thing. And so one sub bucket is going to be either short-term high stress or trauma, right? And so of course, post-COVID, right, lockdowns, right, isolation, breakdowns of social, communities, so on and so forth, and people thinking that they're going to kill grandpa if they, give him a hug. That's a lot of trauma. And so it's probably no surprise then that a year or two later, ADHD medications are now, basically there's a shortage. Yeah. Right. Because, what's going to happen when everybody's under such a high stress and high trauma? Everybody now gets diverted away from those higher executive function centers. And I
struggle with what that means, that we have a trauma societally or socially or even in a family where, let's say, a divorce happens or you lose a family member, and then the kid has some problems focusing, and then we give them a medication. I just feel sad about that. Right. I mean,
you're missing the root, but then also oftentimes that medication is not the appropriate thing for them. Yeah. Right. So,
but it's the quickest go-to, highest perceived hope option for a family and immediately sometimes.
Totally. Yeah. So
even though
that's
it might create other problems, right?
It's going to, right? And it will, right? I mean, whether it's a stimulant base or a non-stimulant base, they're all going to have some of their own issues. So, so I mean, that's one category, right? And then
so just to summarize there, when you think about ADHD or someone who's having trouble paying attention, lack of focus, oftentimes what's going on is that there's like a shutting down of the prefrontal cortex. There are long-term planning centers and motivational centers, and there's like a kind of a more heightened, you might see this in a brain map maybe, of like a more heightened focus or intensity with the waves that are coming out of the amygdala and the structures there. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So what it'll look like practically for us using EEG analysis is we'll see regions around the prefrontal and frontal that should be able to fire in what we call beta waves. They should be able to fire faster. And in clients that have, reduced ability for impulse control and there's a lot of subcategories inside of those things, but impulse control, attention, again, like we were saying, organization of our thoughts, what we call sequential processing, right? I'm going to do A and then B and then C and then D, right? And I'm going to be able to stay on that. Yeah. We see that those areas basically slow down, right?
This is like the coach inside, right? Like I'm picturing like the modeling of the interpersonal relationship version. That would be mom who goes, or dad or whoever goes, hey, we're going to do your homework. I know you're overwhelmed, inflamed, right?
Yep.
I know you're overwhelmed. Let's do step A.
Totally.
We're going to do for 5 minutes. We'll take a break.
Yes.
Right. This is the kind of interaction that they're needing to kind of stay lighting that place up inside.
Right. Yeah. Because technically those regions of the brain, and Dan Siegel's one of the, he was on the forefront with this research, is that those areas are constantly shushing our limbic, right, reactionary centers, right? So if that was the third floor up above, they're shushing the second floor, right? They're shushing the limbic system. So they're sending constant inhibitory signals.
Right. Yeah.
So, which means they have to be healthy and well.
Kind of like, not right now, we're going to do that later, that kind of thing.
Constantly,
right? Lateral prefrontal, like BIS is a thing, that behavioral inhibition system, but like this inhibitory kind of like, it's okay.
Totally. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. They're kind of like constantly shushing, or like more like a mother with a newborn, right? Like just shh. Like there's constant signaling happening. And so if the mother now goes offline, right, now the newborn is not getting that area is getting disinhibited. And so then those deeper centers in the second floor begin to fire more, right? So we can see what we can see better is the mama getting, is the mama slowing down, right? Or those regions slowing down. Yeah. And again, that's getting a little bit even. We look at a lot of different signatures, and so for some they're too fast, right? Like, and that's its whole. Yeah, there's too much stuff. It's literally just shushing, but it's not paying attention to anything of what the child's doing. We call those beta spindling. That's its own issue. It has to do with impulsivity, even going into like more manic-y kind of states. And so, but yeah, so we can see these things. I mean, that's the kind of the point. Is like, oh my gosh, it's here. It's being published, right? But
I think about that with the shushing thing or like what you talked about a parent who's maybe, let's say, preoccupied. They're anxious with their own thing. They're too busy. They're overwhelmed, understandably, with other things, or even cell phone usage by parents of maybe not staying tuned in as much to our own child's signals. I have 4 kids, and so I'm thinking about that with myself too. Right. Of maybe this need that the child has to have someone who's kind of checking in on them, or, helping them in some way. But if the parent's tuned out, this whole structure in the brain has a lot more difficulty, finding a way through in some way. Is that, am I have that
sure.
Right?
Yeah. I'm definitely right. That's going to be there. That's going to be there. And though in the ADHD conversation, if there's a subgroup of people that are kind of maybe getting that label, that maybe they're not going to be served as well as are going to be these, individuals with high stress, right? And trauma, right? That's one group. And so that's where, for those people that have the high stress or traumas, one thing that can happen is during high stress and trauma, the metaphorical parent region, right?
The internalized.
That region can't do its job. And so the individual becomes more impulsive, more dopamine seeking, right? All those things that we kind of see. and can't hold attention, can't organize their thoughts, right? Gets more brain fog. And so again, if we can understand that there's like, oh, this is happening right here, it helps the individual, right? It helps whether it's a child, who's, getting diagnosed as ADHD. It helps the child understand themselves a little bit better, but then it also helps to kind of now direct resources a little bit better too, right? Because now maybe it's not so much about, well, do we need this kind of chemical or that chemical? Do we need this stimulant or this other thing? But more about like, maybe we want to direct more resources towards helping the child have, manage their arousal level, meaning their how, what's going on in their nervous system, right? Maybe again, counseling, maybe, family dynamic counseling about what's going on, right? Like, so not just the understanding, but also the ability to now divert resources appropriately becomes huge.
Right. So you're talking there about the prefrontal area, right? And then I also think about the amygdala thing too, about there's the one thing you're talking about is the inhibition kind of function that needs to be stimulated there, of like almost like it's okay to calm down the amygdala. But I'm kind of wondering too about the things that either you might prescribe in that situation, or that parents or whoever can pay attention to about, because what I think of when I think of amygdala firing is I think of the need for safety and security.
Right.
And I don't know, I'm curious about your thoughts about that.
Yeah. I mean, the amygdala, what's really cool is that there's two, right? There's a right and left. It plays a huge role, right? With like emotional fear response. There's a lot of emotional memory. Like there's a lot that goes on. But it's now kind of become the character of like that fear, that need for safety, which is still valid. It's really useful and necessary. And that system, again, this is going back to the state and trait, right? So I guess for the listeners, right? State is something that I'm going through right now. It's something I'm feeling. It's something I'm expressing right now, and it can pass, right? I'm feeling really tired for some reason. Well, that's my state, and then, well, if I go for a run, now all of a sudden I feel like I've got some more energy. And so my state now changed again. Trait is kind of like, what is my pattern over time, right? What is the thing that I keep going back to, right?
What are my tendencies?
Right? What's my MO? What the brain mapping allows us to do is identify people's traits, right? And so we can see a trait, going back to the amygdala, we can see traits that have been published and replicated that show that this person's amygdala keeps firing in, almost like it's just a program that just keeps playing itself out. And so this person is going to continue to tend to have this tendency to feel unsafe, to be reactive, to not be able to focus very well. And
even when safety is there,
right? It doesn't matter, right? It's
so
just
there's
a
no
program.
danger around. I should feel safe. I got the warm blanket. I'm doing all the calming exercises. I'm deep breathing. But my amygdala is still going to almost want to act like there is a danger around the next corner.
It's going to do it, right? It's going to continue to do it. And if you're able to settle it down, it's going to be waiting for the opportunity for something to smell like danger for it to just go up again. Right?
This is reminding me of my cat, where we have two cats. One of them is a wonderful cat, right? The other one, I think, spent the first few months of their life out on the streets and became like a shelter cat, and we brought it in. But we've had the cat for years,
right?
And the cat hates us. It's so scared. Every time we go into a room with it, it's like as if we're strangers to this cat. And we fed this cat since it was this big. And I think about that, of going, there's no regulating function of its brain to correct itself and go, I know you're scared, but this is a different situation. Right. It keeps replaying, like you're saying, it keeps replaying the early experience over and over again, like a tape recorder.
Right.
No matter how much safety we give this cat, I can't pet this cat enough to let it know that it's okay and that it's safe.
It's not going to rewrite it enough, right?
It's not going to do it.
That's where the second thing that we do, neurofeedback, can be life-changing, right? Because, and that's, if you could put a couple of sensors over that region and you know what it's doing, you know that this region is overfiring. I'm just going to give an example. And it's creating, it's firing in a way that we're going to just create, or I'm just going to, fast alpha. It's creating a lot of really, really fast signaling to the nervous system that is keeping it in a fight or flight state, right? Again, you can't talk about it. You're not going to talk it out of being what it is. But if you put a sensor over there and you can see their brainwaves up on the screen above, you can actually teach that individual to begin to then change the way that that specific part of their brain fires. They begin to rewrite that program without them even knowing what they're doing.
Wow.
And so how do they rewrite it? Well, in our office, we have them watching their favorite Netflix shows, right? Whatever it is, Netflix or Disney Prime, or whatever it is, right? Their favorite show. But we have a couple sensors over that region that they're training. We know what it's doing. We know its signature, and we can see it up on the screen above. And we also know what it kind of needs to be able to do also. Like it needs to switch gears.
Yeah.
And it's gotten stuck on a gear, right? And so, and what we understand with neuroscience is that the individual brain wants to see something clearly, right? So if they're watching a show and when they're producing that fast alpha, that's, that old program, our software will make that show go into black and white. It'll look like there's rain on the screen, right? It gets fuzzy, it distorts it, right? And they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're trying to access. They don't know how to make their alpha slow down 2 hertz, right? But the brain is going to figure out whatever the heck it needs to do to get that show to be clear.
That's fascinating.
It is. And so they don't have to try to do it, right? We're just going to kind of, put that into a thing that they already want to do. They just want to watch their shows, right?
Yeah.
And so whether it's a neurodivergent child wants to watch their shows, right? Whether it's an adult after a busy day, they can just watch their show too. And yet they're doing reps like at the gym.
Yeah.
Right? Because again, going back to neurons that fire together, wire together, they're getting about 900 to 1,000 reps.
Wow.
Of firing together in the exact thing that we're asking it to do. So it knows how to do it. It knows how to go slower or faster, but it's gotten stuck.
Yeah.
And so when we have them do 1,000 reps in that, 10 to 20 minutes, they're getting those neurons locally are getting the workout. And then when that person sleeps that night and the next few nights after that, during REM sleep, because we know this is when it happens, is when the rewiring happens.
Yeah.
Right.
And now you go from a state to a trait.
Change.
The more you hold that, just like exercising, the more you hold that state, the more your mind goes, oh, we need to do this more. We need to put more resource behind this growth here, or the dendritic growth. But you go, okay, so there's a way in the moment they're able to tune out of their anxiety or that kind of wave. But then over time it becomes a tendency or a trait. And I'm curious too, so it's not like and what's fascinating to me too is that when they're watching their favorite show, their amygdala might be still lighting up like this.
It will. Yeah. What we don't realize is that there's all this background processing that's happening, even though we're not aware of it.
Right.
And so we can see on an EEG that background processing was still there. Right. So you don't need to be in a high fear state for us to already know that with you just sitting there, that background pattern is still running. Right. So we can catch that background. And so which is helpful.
Right. And I'm thinking even right there about how it's like, this is what trauma does, right? It's like, it's not just, oh, I have a reactivity. It's like, there's like a low buzz. It's kind of what you're describing of like this, well, what did you call it? Alpha.
Like the alpha speed.
Right.
Yeah.
This low buzz of high cortisol, which is going to affect your body. It's going to create tension in your muscles, right? In your digestive tract. There's going to be diversion of blood flow. it's going to mess up your body. And our minds are obviously made to go into high cortisol state temporarily, right? There's supposed to be an arc throughout the day, maybe,
right,
or throughout a workout or throughout a high stress situation. But here, what you're talking about is that even when they're watching their favorite show, there's a difficulty that they're going to have with actually entering into a restful state.
for sure.
And so if they're doing that during they're watching their favorite show, how much more is it hard for them when they're arguing with their spouse,
Right,
or trying to sleep at night,
right,
or trying to get work done? If they're watching their favorite show and they're still needing to do this workout, where they're pushing up, I just have sympathy for how much a person is having to hold together in the back of their mind always.
Yeah. It uses up a lot of RAM, right? Like if we stay with that, like it uses up a ton of mental, physical energy.
Yeah.
Right. These neurons are still, the neurons are still firing way more than they should in these more limbic centers. This is not it doesn't feel good, right? More chemicals, cortisol and others are being released. But you can also see oftentimes they're also having to like overthink, right? I mean, we see that with ourselves. We're overthinking about things, or we're becoming hypervigilant with the area around us, right?
Yeah.
Like if you and I are just sitting here in this room, and I think we feel pretty safe here, and so, but if somebody has, like, we can actually see this too, which are called lambda waves in the back, when somebody over a certain age, when they're just sitting there, we can literally just see where their eye movement is going, all over the room over and over again, and not stopping during the entire 20-minute recording.
Wow.
And there have been published studies that show that, like, when that's happening, it's not just that the person is voluntarily looking at, to make sure that all the entryways are safe and that their surrounding is safe, and they recheck and see if their surrounding is safe, and they recheck again, right? Like, is that the visual centers have actually over connected to the amygdala and some of these other deeper limbic centers, to where there's this kind of constant, right, hypervigilance. There's this visual hypervigilance.
Wow.
And so that takes up a lot of processing. It's a lot of RAM.
Wow.
Right? And that one example of that visual hypervigilance, imagine somebody, that person's going to get diagnosed as ADHD 10 times out of 10. Right?
Because they're moving their attention all over the place.
All over the place, right? They're not going to pay attention to this chain of thought that we have, right? This your body expression, your face, like, they're going to be blind to that. All they're looking for is threat. And it's going to interrupt, 1,000 times, an hour. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is all of us in some spectrum, right?
Right.
I think about how much we can see these traumas as individual things that individuals go through. But then, like you're saying before, we can see them as collective experiences that we all are in the same pool together in some way.
Yeah.
And there's a striving when people come into your office or into mine too of trying to access something different inside, something that they know is maybe more true about them, or more, larger in terms of what they want for themselves, what they want for life, what they want for their kids. And then here you have these blinders on, the way that the mind has learned to, like my cat, the way that the mind has learned to kind of almost section off this more open way of being with oneself, feeling safe, planning, feeling motivated, aware, connected, and that we kind of, through the trauma, have kind of like put these blinders on, where there's this, what you're describing is this intense, inflamed response that shuts down the most beautiful parts of our brains.
Right.
And there's like a collective loss in that, isn't there?
Oh yeah. That
people are kind of striving to try to reconnect with things that we all need to access. We need to feel these things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like, kind of going along with what you're saying, what happens when the whole family experiences something really traumatic? I mean, we've gone through the fires here in Los Angeles. We all have clients that lost homes, or who had close family members who lost homes. And so all these things, and not only the displacement and the financial burdens, and then of course dealing with all the insurances and so on. But the things that we thought were solid are not, right? The things that we thought are permanent now are not, right? When you have like a whole city like Altadena that like just doesn't look the same anymore, and all of your usual, your school isn't there anymore, your local cafe isn't there anymore. That's a collective trauma, right? And so, so what happens when the whole community now has limited ability to, right, be patient with each other, to see how to have perspective, to have better impulse control, to and then and we're buzzing, right? We have our own buzz, maybe not at a 10, but maybe at a at a 4, right? And that buzz begins to add up when then we have an argument with our wife or your spouse and so on and so forth, right? So I mean, it's along those lines. One of the things that gave me it's transformed the way I see myself as well as humanity, right? To be able to look under the hood, like you described, and see that the things that we assumed about ourselves as like we're kind of a blank slate, or maybe we have agency, right? We assume agency, right? We assume the ability to choose how I'm going to feel, how I'm going to behave, how I'm going to perceive the world, right? We kind of assume that we all have that, and that there's a pretty, even, distribution. And then, we begin to look under the hood and see, again, it doesn't define who we are, but it does see like, oh, each of us are kind of working with really significantly different things that influence how we behave and how we perceive and what we're feeling and how much we can feel. And so it gives me a lot of empathy, right, for others. And it gives, I've done my brain map many times, and it also gives me empathy for, myself. Like, oh, like these are areas that no matter how hard I've been trying to get here or to be able to do this consistently, this is a challenge. And so it gives me, again, it doesn't let me off the hook. Like, it's not like, okay, well, I don't have any agency, but it lets me know that I have to put a disproportionately high amount of energy to try to do certain things in some areas of my life that someone else may be able to do. Like, that's all they can do. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So anyways.
Well, you see these different impacts that we all hold, or different, I don't want to say really scars, but like, different, impacts of our past experience that we all hold, but each person striving for something close to, let's say, coherence or connectivity, not just within oneself and that growth of awareness, but within their families. Right. Like, there's like a striving toward that thing where you go, you want to be in a place, and I think this is what I'm hearing from what you're saying that your patients are coming in for. You want to be in a place where you can be motivated and achieve something that is meaningful to you, that you can feel safe and connected to others, that you can regulate, big emotions within yourself, that kind of internal parent that you're talking about, but also with your loved ones as well. And then I'm picturing you looking at all these brains and seeing the same laptop kind of in different environments, and I know they're not all the same, right? But like, there is so much in common there, where you look at the same 3D map and you see these different, almost simulations of different past experiences that have led this person to this current situation where they're experiencing this difficulty.
Yeah. And so, yes, absolutely. And there's another category, right? The other category is, what did we inherit? Right? Because again, there's a whole group of papers and studies that have shown that there are certain things that we call phenotypes. So, I was using the example of what we call this fast alpha. So this is the scenario. We'll have a parent who brings a child in and the child is extremely anxious, right? And it's spilling over. And so what does that mean? It means, again, the child is in a very high arousal state. They're kind of always in this kind of, right? Their heart's always fluttering. Their muscles are always tight. Their digestion's always off. Like, there's all, there's that. And the child has sleep issues and the child has focus issues, right? Well, there's a phenotype of what's called fast alpha And it's not just this alpha, it's literally it's a thing called the thalamus, that literally is kind of like it's like the bass player of the band, or the drummer of the band. Like it's setting the pace, the background rhythm of the whole brain. And so we inherit this from mom or dad. We inherit the set point as to how fast that processes. Now, there's so many more amazing layers to this fact of the speed of this processing, because it is also like our speed of processing, right? But if what's going to happen though is that this child and I'll use example. I'll change it up. I'll say the father. They're both very quote unquote anxious, right? They both have trouble sleeping. They both have, and so then we say, oh, is this generational stuff that we're doing, or is this a parenting issue? Well, there's actually going to be a biological source, which is that they both have a tendency for this thalamus to fire extremely fast. They'll probably still be usually higher achieving. They tend to be, processing a lot. They literally process more than other people in the same amount of time. But it wasn't because of the parenting. It wasn't because of the child's experiences even, right? This is just a phenotype. This is just a way that the brain has expressed itself.
Yeah.
Now, it can be tuned also with neurofeedback, which is amazing. But I think the point though here is that, sometimes we then create a narrative on top of this and say, well, it was because I was too hard on them when this happened. Well, it was because this occurred to them in third grade, and maybe because they're already at a set point with if their arousal is like always at an 8, it doesn't take much to get them up to a 9 or 10.
Right.
So they're going to be a little bit more prone to have these bigger responses. But like, look, this is something that was kind of already wired into them, and it can be tuned. So like if they're an 8, you can tune that back down to a 6 or a 5 or even 4. Right. So they don't have to stay that way, but it's good to understand that this is not, again, because something happened to them or because of the parenting. Right.
Yeah. And you go, okay. And that helps you get off the guilt too of going, oh, it's my fault. And you go, well, even that, I'm not sure how much it benefits the kid, to whether you blame, it's more like what's going to be helpful.
What's going to be
them.
helpful. That's everything.
And so to be able to say, this is a phenotype and, hopefully it helps a parent get off of that train of guilt and go, okay, well, what does my kid need? How do I help him?
Yeah.
And that's really helpful. And that, I think that if I'm right, that kind of pulls into kind of what we were talking about before we started of like this kind of maybe different set of concerns that you guys are focusing more on currently or now.
Right.
But can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing that back up. The work that we do can potentially help many different types of people, right? So, because again, it's the brain. And so you can kind of help different groups and subgroups. I have like 30 thoughts in my brain right now. So, I personally feel passionate about at the highest capacity that I know how to reduce suffering and improve agency, right? And so the unique set of tools that we have has this unique ability to kind of fit a need in the greater whole, which is to help with significant anxiety and trauma changes in the brain. We get to help that individual begin to change those traits. Right. And we never try to do that by ourselves, meaning we work with you, we work with other therapists, we work with other psychiatrists, we work with we understand that this is going to be a collective process, but the unique piece of the puzzle that we are, uniquely skilled to be able to add has a tremendous impact for individuals. And so, so more than a third of our practice are, children and adults that have significant anxiety, right? And we see how it impacts so many things too. And so because it is kind of like it's an upstream problem for downstream issues. So again, when somebody has anxiety, guess what? That's another category for people that are given this ADHD diagnoses, and they actually just have severely high over arousal that's even different than trauma. Right? And so there's this cool little bell curve made by these researchers, and so it's called the Yerkes-Dodson law, right? And it's just kind of like, if you picture a bell curve on like one end, is like how, well, on the bottom of the curve is basically arousal, and arousal is a fancy word for saying like, how active is my nervous system right now, right? So if I'm on the left of the bell curve, I'm like really drowsy and sleepy. If I'm really on the right of the bell curve, I'm like in super high arousal, right? Like just picture
shaking.
I'm shaking, right?
Manic.
Yeah. And on the, on the other side of the curve, on the other axis is basically what we call performance. But for our sake today, I'm going to say attention. Okay. And so what does that mean? It means that if I'm too drowsy, I'm going to have low attention, which we kind of get, right? As I get a little bit more activated, there's a sweet spot in the middle of the bell curve where my attention actually is kind of optimal. But now if you kind of get me more activated, my attention keeps dropping more and more again, right? So whether I'm like really sleepy or really overactivated, both are actually have been shown, this was research done out of the 50s, right? Has been shown to dramatically drop our attention.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So what's the point? Well, all the stresses, all the things that have been going on, and some of the ways that we've kind of been, that, these generations have been born, is that, kind of collectively we have this really high arousal state, right? And so for a lot of people, the thing that they need is to actually change their trait setting to be more to the middle of that bell curve. And for that group of people too, like that's all you have to do, right? Like again, it wasn't trauma. It wasn't any of these other things. They just need to bring it down, right? And by bringing it down, all of a sudden they feel clear, they feel more focused, they feel right. And so, so that's something that we can help, and we help with a lot, right? But also, there's another part of the brain. It's kind of front midline. So again, forehead, but you kind of go to the center, like follow the line up your nose and go up about another, 3 or 4 inches.
Yeah, above your forehead.
And above your forehead. Yeah. And it's called the anterior cingulate. I'm oversimplifying these as if it's just one area. It's everything is kind of a group of networks, but still. And that anterior cingulate dictates 2 things, but I'm going to focus on one, which is it's the looping. It's how much, it's called the error detection loop, right? So again, if there was a setting 0 to 10, a 2 is, when I write an email, I'm going to go back and check it and make sure that I wrote it, right? If I'm going to go out, I'm going to, look at the mirror one more time and make sure I don't have spinach in my teeth, right? I'm going to cross the street, left, right, maybe left again, right? So there's this kind of, it's what our brain does. It's always checking and rechecking.
Right. This is like compulsivity, obsessiveness.
So if we go to an 8, 9, 10, we now give it the name, right? OCD. And such. But, but what about when it's like a 4, right? Or a 5? Well, this is the individual who, they're lying down to go to sleep. It's 11:30 at night. And like, all of a sudden they're like, well, why did they say that? I can't believe they said that. Like, don't they know that would be like, and they just can't let it go. Right. Like that's this part.
When I think of that, I think about some clients that I have who struggle with that.
Yeah.
And it's like, there's no finish line to the marathon.
Ever.
They get to the last mile and they go, no, you ought to go back and redo the last 2 miles.
Absolutely.
Over and over and over again. Yep. And there's a difficulty relinquishing and finally crossing and going,
and it never
done.
will.
I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Yeah.
But it's painful,
so
for them, and I think it's so interesting. I mean, literally when I think about that race, let's say in the mind, I think about it starting in the limbic system, coming to the prefrontal cortex, got to plan those steps. And then this checker right there. That goes, wait a second.
Yep.
Did you get everything done? But also that part, if I'm right, has a lot to do with kind of this, like, you're almost there. You can, come on, keep going. And then you have the ventral striatum kind of pleasure center area there, which is to me kind of like the finish line of you did it. Totally. You're good. Like this loop that should self-complete and go, you did a good day's work.
Right.
You did as much as you could do.
Yep.
You did good.
Yep.
You know, you're
Close the
all
loop.
done.
Yep.
And yet here's this like right before the finish line, this sense of like, I don't think I did everything, did I?
Totally.
You know, and they keep kind of getting stuck over and over
Right.
there.
And everything that goes through that process will always keep getting stuck there. Right. And so we can see that on a brain map.
Really?
Yep. So we can see how much a person tends to do that. We can, and again, because we can see it, you can also put sensors there and you can tune it. Right?
Wow.
So, yeah, I affectionately call that area the Chihuahua. And so I think, we've all kind of seen, where that little dog Chihuahua has kind of like has tyrannized the whole family in the house. It's always yapping and barking at everybody. And it always actually needs something to chew on.
Huh.
Right. And so this part of the brain always needs actually something to lock onto. Right. And so as a therapist, I would imagine, I don't know, you can tell me if it's wrong, but the person is really concerned about a problem, right? And so whether it's their child or so on. And here you are guiding them through all of the process, giving them all of the tools, giving them all of the skills, all the empathy in the world, right? And then finally that issue gets resolved. The child now is through it, right? Everything's great, right? And what's going to happen? Like the split second, they're going to jump to the next thing. The Chihuahua needs something to chew on. It will then chew. So if it's been chewing on the shoe, it now then goes and chews on the stuffed animal.
Wow.
And then you solve the stuffed animal and then it's going to find something else. Because again,
it literally can be chewing on something. I mean, thinking about someone who goes from cigarettes to gum, and they have to literally chew on something.
Yeah, they do have to literally do that.
Because it feels like something's nagging at me and I have to like take care of it.
Yes.
I have to get rid of it.
Yes.
It also reminds me of, I remember learning of like the agency detection system of like this part of us that kind of like when we're anxious, we're looking for, the boogeyman, where we have to place it somewhere.
Right.
We can't just let it be ambiguous. We're always looking for an object of our fear,
right.
And we'll create one just to be satisfied. Kind of like, in a scary movie where you're looking for the monster everywhere. And then once you see it, something actually kind of relaxes. Mm-hmm. You go, oh, that's it. Mm-hmm. Because when it's not there and you can't localize it, your brain just goes crazy.
Right.
Going, where is it? Where is it? But I imagine someone in the situation at the end of the day going, where is it? I know I missed something and there's something there and I don't know where it is. And it freaks them out, but you go, you got to give them like a chew toy of like, here it is,
Yeah. So, it's fascinating that you can see it. It's fascinating that that area is also, it's both things. It's a phenotype, meaning we inherit it also from mom or dad or both, right? So we'll often see, right, in families where that's going to be there.
Right.
And also with high stress and trauma, that area gets less and less connected to the shushers. And so, which we all have kind of seen, where then somebody's going through a really high stressful time, they become more ruminative and obsessive, right? Or they had a really traumatic event and now they're quote unquote OCD. They have to have certain things controlled, and because the control is also a part of that. So, but I'm talking about the looping, where then the looping now just gets kind of, it starts going, so that thing can get, exacerbated with trauma, with high stress. But also that person may have already had a tendency for that because they already inherited the tendency for that, from mom or dad. So again, amazing that you can see it.
Amazing.
Right? Amazing, hopefully for a therapist to say like, oh, like maybe I don't, maybe we want to look at this differently, because maybe a young therapist may say, well, if I just help them solve that problem, if I just help them get that insight, right? If I just help them whatever, they would finally settle. That's maybe an unspoken assumption for some people. But when you realize, oh, that chihuahua was going to chew, right? And so, what a lot of the, therapists that focus more on OCD and use different tools, help the individual kind of at least see, they give the chihuahua a different name, but they see that is just a thing that just wants to do it. Right. So the person can have a little bit of space and perspective.
Observing it, ego. And even that strengthens the frontal lobe too, of going, maybe that shushing voice that is self-aware of this tendency,
Yeah.
and can redirect.
You can redirect it, or just see it, or not give it, not feed it more. And this is again going back to our passion, my passion, is that like, my God, you can actually help that person finally turn that thing down.
Yeah.
And when they can turn that thing down, now it's like, the whole family's back, the chihuahua's settled. And so now the whole family can have actually a whole life. The whole brain can now begin to do things differently.
And you're talking about the whole 1,000 reps thing again there, having this immediate feedback.
Yeah.
Where instead of, let's say, doing one rep where you go a piece of insight from a therapist, or you have a self-awareness where you go, oh shoot, I'm doing that right now, aren't I? And maybe it takes you 30 minutes to realize that you're doing it. Here's this like game-like scenario where there's this immediate joystick feedback of, keeping them firing in the right kind of mode there.
Yes. Yeah. It compresses decades worth of work. Right. And I would say maybe even still more effective because it's so specifically targeting that thing.
Yeah.
Right. You don't need to like access a bunch of other stuff to try to get that along with it. So the compression is profound. Right. And so when you get to then see the individual in 4 months, like we do 4-month increments of work. And so where they'll train about, 40 sessions over about 4 months or so, 3 or 4 months, depending on what they're doing. And so for some people, like in 4 months, we're already seeing like a reduction of like 30 to 50% of that chihuahua, right? Like, so like if they were an 8, now they're maybe a 5 or a 4. Like, now they may still tend to do that. And if there's high stress or trauma, it's going to want to go up a little bit. But the whole point is that they have a new trait. They have a new trait setting.
Yeah.
Right. And so now all of a sudden you just see the human, right? Like they have so much more potential now. They have so much more capacity.
Wow.
Right.
There's this, I can picture specific situations, that you're talking about there. And again, like you said, there's probably a degree to which, in a high stress environment, all of us might be somewhere on that spectrum of
for sure.
Feeling like there's something that I know that I'm not quite, okay. And I know there's something that I need to do. This nagging feeling that people will have dreams about. They'll stay up all night. They'll, they'll overwork themselves trying to figure out what it is.
Yeah.
But like you're saying, there's really insidious tendency there of continuing to find new chew toys, when there's a whole different thing that needs to happen there, of kind of letting go by letting that area calm down.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's really huge. I mean, and again, like, and I'm glad you brought that up because it's not like, this person with X syndrome comes in, right? Like these are just humans, right? That just say, this is now getting in the way.
Yeah.
Right.
And what is it worth it? What is it worth to me with my sleep, with my stress, with my health, with my job?
Yeah.
To be able to, let's say, get to the end of a night and to go, I did it. I'm okay.
Yeah.
Instead of, blowing through time that should be my weekend or should be time off work, without being able to let something go.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we see, it's huge. It's huge. I went through one of the probably the most difficult year of my life last year. And I'm noticing it, I was noticing it in myself, and I was, and strangely enough, it took me quite a few months before I felt like I was even in a space to say, so what was I noticing? I was, under high amount of stress, emotional stress and turmoil. It was very, very challenging. And I'm finding myself needing to, for me, thankfully, it was, going to the gym. Like I had to go work out, right? And it was like, and then I would sit down and try to focus on certain, tasks and projects that we had. And it was like, I just can't focus. Right? I'm just, there's this thing, there's this, this sense of, right, things are not well, right? Yeah. And I was able to lean on many tools, having so many great, friends and mentors and colleagues. But finally, it was like a few months later where I realized, come on, like, why am I not training? Why am I not doing the neurofeedback? Like I've done 5 rounds on myself already for other things. Why am I not leaning on this too? And I finally did. And again, it was like, it only took a few weeks for me because I had done so much work beforehand. And it was like, it just went down. I mean, again, it was like in half. Right. And so then it's like, okay, well, I feel like, again, if this is a pitcher and I'm always feeling like I'm spilling over with water, like it just like it emptied half of that out. Right. So now I can take in more. Right.
Wow. And you said you were kind of even hesitant to do it. And I bet that whatever emotional hesitancy you might have had might be the same thing that other people might have, of exploring.
Oh yeah.
I don't know what it is for you. I could imagine being something like, I don't want to know. I don't want to know that it's an issue. This is what I hear all the time with people. And if I do know it's an issue, it's going to cause more stress. Right. And I imagine it's the exact opposite when you actually look at it and you can see it and you can get help. It's like, it's relieving. It's the opposite of work, is that similar?
Yeah,
to
no,
what
I agree. Yeah. And for me, it was also, around taking care of myself. Also, I think that's another big one. And again, I don't know if I would have used consciously these words, right? But like, do I deserve to spend this time? Am I being selfish for doing this? And again, it doesn't reach the word stage yet, right? It's just this feeling,
not conscious.
Right? When I get towards the action, something kicks it in and it moves it in a different direction, right? And so, but if I think about it for me, that was probably a big one. And I think that's big with a lot of parents and professionals, right? People that have learned to kind of put aside their own needs and go after something else.
Right. Especially when you're thinking about something like, you're kind of talking about a little bit of a guilt cycle that it can be of like, I didn't do it all. And that has everything to do, I think, with self-care and how people can spend time doing that. It can feel like the opposite of what they should be doing. And it's also a zero-sum game. If I spend time on this, I'm not spending time on other things.
Yeah, totally.
And that's the biggest fallacy that we can all believe sometimes when we think about taking care of ourselves. I'm taking something away from my family. I'm paying for these sessions.
Right.
But everyone else in the family will go, please do it. It's the best use of our money. Please do this thing because, and I think about this with bosses that I've had or even my own parents, when they go away and they take time for themselves, it's the biggest gift.
Yeah, it totally is.
To me, I can see when they come back and they feel refreshed and present and
it spills over to those around them.
Please do that again.
Right. Totally. But
we think of it as a zero-sum game of like you said, of like, if I do this, if I take time or money to do this, I'm going to be worse for it, or other people are going to be worse for it in some way. Yeah,
no, absolutely. That's huge, and for me, again, it was a little bit unique as well, but I'd like to speak to what you're mentioning. Yeah. Also because, I'm Dr. Licata, right? I'm my team's there, and so it's like, I'm going to go back to that space that I guess I'm used to having a certain role, a certain, persona, and it's saying, no, I need help too right now. Yeah. Like I'm being vulnerable and I'm going to do it in this space because I was used to doing it with others outside, with other professionals, kind of like behind the curtain, right?
Yeah.
We're always trying to project, at least I did when I was younger, but it's still the remnants, trying to project this thing like, I have it figured out. Let me help you, right?
But there's a different kind of strength in
humility,
and
transparency,
normalizing. I find that with my clinicians as well. Of that, the more I share that way, I think there's a lot more security.
Yeah.
But again, like the perception is, if I do this, if I enter into it, I'm actually like somehow creating some kind of fear, or which isn't the case.
Yeah.
But wow, that's remarkable. That makes me curious too. I think about that for myself. Of I go biking, and there's this certain like zone that I'm looking for when I go in there where I'm in pain. Right. But I tell myself, you can do this. You're okay. You're going to be all right. It's going to feel good when you reach the top. And there's something that feels incredibly cathartic about getting into that zone and practicing that almost as like a, it's hard to picture, but this pocket emotionally that I think is so important. And I'm kind of wondering if I'm trying to work out that same place that you're talking about, which is kind of like, there's something hard you're going through, but you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
It's going to be all right. Or to kind of say it differently, like what you're saying of like being able to give the chihuahua a chew toy of like, you're doing enough, or it's all right. You be able to relax in that state. Am I kind of touching on the same kind of area there, or what do you think about that
when
differently?
it comes to where the biking would be similar to the neurofeedback part, or
would it be similar
the
to
self-care
this
in general?
this interior
the
interior
anterior
cingulate?
cingulate. That one is probably going to be a little bit different.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think there's going to be I think it's going to be a little bit different.
Okay.
But the cingulate has no, like, again, the hardest part about thinking about it is that it's got no other purpose than to loop.
Okay.
Right? And so when it just keeps looping and loops and loops and loops, yes, maybe in the sense that if you're able to kind of go through that whole process, maybe you've completed the cycle and you get to maybe take some of the looper out. I think that's possible for sure. Right. Yeah, definitely. But yeah, I think it's, why am I, an assumption that I have about the brain is that things that change, things that become a trait, need an extraordinary amount of effort or capacity to shift it, right? Like, and so
it doesn't want to change on its own.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
And it takes, this is the idea of like, well, if I meditate, I'm going to now be better. I'm going to change a lot of my brain. Well, yes, but, most of the time what we're seeing is that it's 40 years of consistent meditation.
Right.
Right. Like, it's not,
for example, try learning to speak a new language fluently.
Right.
And think about all the obstacle and you're going to feel that you're going to need to get through or over in order to achieve that plasticity. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I guess what I'm saying is that if your Chihuahua was at a 2 out of 10, right? Or maybe let's just say a 4 out of 10, like it's higher, right? You may be able to keep it from a 4 to like back down to a 3 by doing the bike rides.
Right.
Right. But like, if you're like a 5 or 6 or 7 out of 10, like there are very few things that are going to get it down that many notches. Right. Yeah. Right. But maybe the bike ride would help at least kind of just take it from an 8 to a 7.5. Right. So it kind of depends also on like how much of that trait is being expressed in that person. How much, how literally how thicker is the wiring, right, in those regions. I'm kind of, and that's where the uniqueness of each individual comes in, right? Because we can both say, all right, we both have a tendency to ruminate, but right, like I may be at an 8 and you may be at a 6 or a 4, and so I try the bike ride and like I'm like, it's not really doing it for me, right? And so that's just kind of a way to think about the unique differences in like the scale. But then if we think about all the other different rooms of the brain and they each have their own scale, like now we start to see that there's some complexity in there.
Maybe to use a different analogy, you'd go, if you wanted to speak differently, you might be able to remember a few Spanish words or something like that. But if you want to speak a different language, you're going to have to immerse yourself with this different environment. And even then, it's going to be a lot of effort that your brain's going to have to do to adapt to that new situation.
Yeah.
But if there's no intervention, then you're kind of just playing with your own sandbox of current tools, current situation. You're not going to dramatically change something from within yourself because you're working with the same hardware.
Yeah.
You need to kind of plop your brain into a different environment, whether it's in this situation, a different culture, or in this situation that you're talking about of like a brain feedback thing where your brain is having to stay in this other situation long enough. Like exposure therapy is kind of like this. You have to kind of hold them there for long enough or muscle, think about a knot in your back where you have to push down and keep it there long enough for the body to relax into it. Is a bit of what I'm hearing.
Yeah. I think that's really well said. Yeah. You have to kind of compress it.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
Well, it's wonderful to have you on.
Yeah, thank you.
So you guys are in Pasadena, but you said you see people all over the world. Do you see people virtually?
So what we will have people that fly in to get the map. So that does have to kind of be in person.
Okay. Yeah.
So we have people that fly in from all over. Yeah. At this point, it's all over. But we partnered with a hardware company and an app developer so that they have dry sensors they can put on a cap.
Wow.
They snap on where that goes. I program based on their brain map and what we're working on. Like we choose something. We don't try to change all the brain, right? We try to say, like, in these 4 months, like if we can only change one thing and get that 30 to 50% improvement in that one thing, what would that be?
Yeah.
And then we say, let's work on that. Based on that, then I'll program on the back end what they're getting the feedback, and they download the app, they're watching their shows on the app, and the show on their phone or tablet is going, is doing
That's so cool.
And they're doing that at home, 2 or 3 times a week. And so, this is the cool thing is we've audited how well our people got when they were in office and how well, people, were able to progress remotely. I mean, they're almost like exactly the same. They're so comparable. So that's what it means.
That's really cool. It also is cool to go into your office. You have the nice comfy chair with the big screen TV.
It is, yeah. It's like a little home theater with zero gravity chairs and it's a different experience for sure.
Someone greets you, all that kind of things. But it was cool. I remember seeing where they had it was like a dragon or something like that flying through hoops, like this kind of. So it wasn't watching a show, but it was like almost like a video game, kind of training.
Yeah, we pay tens of thousands of dollars for all kinds of interfaces, and so we have video games and racing and flying, and so
that's cool.
It's really cool.
Yeah, amazing. Well, thank you again for coming on, and a lot here to chew on.
Yeah, there's a lot to chew on, and thank you for doing this. And this is, I think, having these kind of interprofessional conversations and being able to see how some things need to be done collectively.
Yeah.
Right. Like in our instance, right. This is, I'm going to help with the hardware and you're going to help with the software. And to have an individual come in and they have both resources. And again, it's not available for everybody. There's obviously costs that are involved. But again, when we talk about compression, when, it's like, gosh, what would normally be years and as a process to get you through this, like what could you save in money, right? What could you save in relationship, right? In goodwill, in just suffering, if you compressed this, right? And did something together. And that's where we start seeing the real breakthroughs come in. And so, I think a lot of things are going to be kind of like, I'm going to mix metaphors, but like peanut butter and jelly, right? Like each are good, but together they're better.
Yeah.
I think that's where I think it's really exciting. I think that's the direction that hopefully the industry goes.
Yes.
So we'll see.
I agree.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you
very much.
So cool.